On Saturday, February 23, 2019, 23-year-old mother Jassy Correia was out celebrating her birthday with friends at a nightclub called Venue located in Boston's Theater District. After a night of dancing and drinking, Jassy became separated from her group as they left the club. She was intoxicated and mistakenly entered an Uber not meant for her and was pushed out by the driver, causing her to fall. Moments later, a man approached Jassy offering her a ride and they both entered his red sedan. This would be the last known sighting of Jassy alive. 3 days later, Jassy's father reported her missing to Boston police. The sedan was linked to Lewis Coleman through his driver's license. Footage from Lewis's residence in Providence, Rhode Island showed him carrying a body into his apartment building about 2 hours after Jassy got into the vehicle with him. Lewis was also seen entering his apartment building with a suitcase. He's then seen moving the suitcase from his apartment to the trunk of his car. After driving away, Lewis was pulled over by state police and admitted to having Jassy's body in his trunk. She had been strangled, sexually assaulted, and beaten to death. Lewis Coleman was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison. On May 4, 2007, after finishing her overnight shift at Lowe's Distribution Center, 19-year-old Brittany McGlone went to her boyfriend Jeff's family's house in Winsboro, Texas. Later that afternoon, she was found brutally murdered, having suffered extensive head injuries. Initial investigations by the Wood County Sheriff's Department cleared Brittany's boyfriend and his family due to solid alibis. Attention then shifted to Chad Carr, who was dating Jeff's sister, Velva. Chad had a history of prior criminal charges including burglary, sexual assault, and assault with a deadly weapon. Velva told police that Chad had intense jealousy over the fact that Brittany had been allowed to stay overnight at their house while he wasn't. This jealousy was considered a possible motive for the murder. Despite the police continuously working on the case, it went cold for 14 years. However, in 2021, a renewed focus on Chad Carr by a new investigator brought forth new leads. Evidence like women's underwear matching Brittany's size was discovered at Chad's residence. Despite Chad failing a polygraph test and inconsistencies in his alibi, in November 2021, a grand jury declined to indict him due to what they classified as insufficient probable cause. Brittany McGlone's murder currently remains unsolved, with Chad Carr being the primary suspect. On December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas, a fire was reported at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane. Upon extinguishing the fire, authorities found the bodies of 4 teenage girls, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers. All had been bound, gagged, and shot in the head. The investigation persisted for years without any substantial breakthroughs. However, in 1999, 4 men, Maurice Pierce, Forrest Welburn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott, were identified as suspects, with the last 2 being considered the main suspects. Those 2 men, Springsteen and Scott, were arrested and provided confessions to detectives. They later recanted those confessions, claiming they were coerced into giving them. Neither man's DNA matched evidence from the crime scene, yet in 2001, Springsteen was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. The following year, Scott was sentenced to life in prison. 7 years later, in 2009, both convictions were overturned due to concerns about those coerced confessions and the exclusion of the DNA evidence during their trials. Subsequently, both men were released from prison and prosecutors chose not to retry them. The Austin Police Department continues to investigate these murders, but for now they remain unsolved. On February 28, 2021, Brittany Gosney and her boyfriend James Hamilton went to the Middletown Police Department in Ohio to report her 6-year-old son James Hutchinson as missing. Their suspicious behavior prompted an investigation that would shed light on a horrific tale of child abuse. On February 27th, Brittany drove all 3 of her children to Rush Run Wildlife in Preble County with the intention of abandoning them. She got them out of the car, hogtied each of them, and then attempted to speed away. As she did, her son James clung to the car and was run over, leading to his death. She put his body in the trunk, untied her other children, and drove home. The following day, Brittany and her boyfriend tossed James's body into the Ohio River near Lawrenceburg after tying it with bricks to weigh it down. Brittany told detectives that Hamilton pressured her to abandon her children, suggesting the original plan was to leave them at the park. James Hamilton pleaded guilty to kidnapping, gross abuse of a corpse, and child endangerment and was sentenced on October 5, 2021 to a maximum of 19 years in prison. Brittany Gosney was convicted of murder and abusing her 2 other children. She was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 21 years. James's body has never been found. On August 18, 2021, at approximately 4:15 p.m., employees of the newly opened NHK seating plant in Frankfort, Indiana, were jolted by the sound of gunshots. As first responders rushed to the scene following multiple 911 calls, they discovered the lifeless bodies of 21-year-old Promise Mays and her 62-year-old grandmother, Pamela Sled. Surveillance footage from the factory security cameras provided chilling evidence of what had unfolded. The footage showed that shortly after Pamela had parked her car, 26-year-old Gary Farrell drove up and tried to force Promise into the trunk of his vehicle, brandishing a semi-automatic handgun. When Pamela attempted to intervene, trying to protect her granddaughter, she was shot 3 times by Farrell. Gary then turned his attention back to Promise, who had managed to run and crouch behind his car. He shot her as well, and the 2 women were forced to watch each other die. In a further act of cruelty, Gary drove over Promise's body before fleeing the scene. The relationship between Farrell and the 2 women wasn't immediately clear, though it was later revealed that Promise was his ex-girlfriend. After detectives sent out the description of Gary's vehicle, it was located immediately and a high-speed chase ensued, with speeds reaching up to 100 miles per hour. It culminated with Farrell crashing his blue Ford Focus into a construction zone on State Road 28 and Nickel Plate Road. Gary was arrested and taken into custody. He then chillingly confessed that he had spent the previous night planning to abduct and kill Promise. A subsequent search of Farrell's car turned up the weapon used in the murders. Detectives also discovered that the release handle inside the trunk had been severed, ensuring it wouldn't function from the inside. Gary was charged with 2 counts of murder and several other charges. He pleaded guilty to everything and was sentenced to 110 years in prison with a minimum of 80 years before being eligible for parole.